The first narrative takes us to a little town in Oregon, where a young woman named Clara has moved into a charming old apartment. The landlord was an elderly man who appeared anxious to rent the property, but Clara was skeptical. The apartment was ideal, except for one room. It was a small, windowless room with an unsettling chill at the end of a narrow hallway. The landlord advised her not to enter, claiming it was only a storage room, but his tone made her apprehensive. Clara succumbed to her curiosity. One night, she unlocked the door and entered. The door slammed shut behind her. No amount of pulling or bashing would bring it open. In the dark, she could hear faint murmurs, scraping, and the sensation of something brushing over her skin. In that oppressive blackness, hours, if not days, passed without meaning. When Clara was finally discovered, the door was wide open and she was curled up in the corner, her hair absolutely white. She refused to discuss what transpired in that room, and the apartment has been abandoned ever since. The second narrative follows Mike and Jenny, a couple who have moved to a wonderful old house in the countryside. It was wonderful, or so they believed. From the first night, they heard unusual noises, footsteps in the attic, creaking doors, and whispering that appeared to come out of nowhere. They dismissed it as the house settling, or even their imaginations running wild. But soon they witnessed objects moving on their own, chairs scratching across the floor, lights flickering, and chilly patches following them throughout the house. Jenny awoke one night to discover a stranger standing at the foot of her bed. It was a ghostly silhouette, featureless but unmistakably human. It didn't move or speak, just stood there and watched. They contacted a paranormal investigator, who learned that the house had a grim history. A renter died in unexplained circumstances decades ago, and his body has never been located. The investigator told them that the spirit was still present, searching for something or someone. Terrified, the couple fled quickly. The house is now abandoned, but neighbors claim they can still see lights in the windows at night and the silhouette of a man standing at the property's edge, waiting. The final story is about a route in rural Louisiana called the Vanishing Route. The locals avoid it at all costs, particularly at night. It is rumored that persons who travel down that road do not always come back, laughing and joking about the rumors. The route was small, twisting through deep forests that appeared to shut in on them. As they drove deeper into the forest, the laughter subsided, leaving behind an increasing core. A group of pals decided to test the legend. They got in a car and went down the road late one night, sensation of worry. Then the road appeared to go on forever. The trees grew taller, the night became darker, and a dense fog rolled in, swallowing the automobile. The headlights barely cut through the mist, making the road signs unreadable. Panic set in when they discovered they were lost. Regardless of how far they drove, they couldn't find an exit. Suddenly, the automobile stalled. The engine died, the lights failed, and they were left in full darkness. They attempted to start the car, but it refused to move. Then they saw them, dozens of individuals rising from the fog, pale and lifeless, with sunken eyes. They were the lost souls of those who had previously driven along the vanishing road, now permanently bound in its uncanny grip. The friends were never seen again. Their automobile was discovered weeks later, abandoned on the side of the road, but there was no sign of them. According to the locals, the vanishing road claimed them, as it had done with so many others before. These three stories highlight the hidden forces that have the power to mold our lives, as well as the repercussions of curiosity, ignorance, and rebellion. Each story is a disturbing reminder that the unknown is often best left unexplored, and that some paths, once taken, cannot be reversed. The most terrifying atrocities are not those that jump out at us, but those that lurk beneath the surface, waiting for the ideal opportunity to unveil themselves. They stay in the darkest recesses of our thoughts, and once they take hold, they never go. A series of disturbing episodes had begun to spread throughout Ravenswood, a tranquil suburb. What began as missing pets quickly grew into something considerably more horrific. The townspeople murmured of a dark and menacing spirit lurking in the darkness. Sarah, a college student living alone, got home late one evening from her shift at the diner. The night was strangely silent, with only the crunch of gravel under her tires. As she parked her car, she noticed something unusual. The front door to her house was slightly open. Sarah's heart raced in her chest. She was quite particular about locking up, especially given the recent rumors of break-ins. Trying to ignore her panic, she approached the door gently, clutching her keys tightly in her palm. She pushed it open, her breath getting caught in her throat. Everything inside appeared normal at first glance. But as she moved deeper into the living room, a shiver went down her spine. The room was unusually frigid, much colder than it should have been on a hot summer night. She reached for the thermostat, but before she could, the lights flickered and went out, leaving the house in darkness. Panic set in as she scrambled for her phone and used its flashlight to navigate the pitch-black house. The flashlight beam from her phone caught something in the hallway, an impossibly tall and thin shadow standing completely still. Sarah froze. The shadow did not move or make a sound. It was as if it was waiting and watching her. She gathered all her strength and said, "Who's there?" However, there was no reply. The heavy silence pressed down on her, making it difficult to breathe. The shadow suddenly pounced at her, causing her to scream and stumble backward. However, when she shined her light where it had previously been, nothing appeared, just empty space. Sarah, trembling, raced for the front door, desperate to get out. However, the door slammed shut before she could reach it, as if an invisible force was trapping her inside. Sarah's heart raced as she remembered the old stories her grandmother told her about the silent shadow, a dark thing that thrived on fear and sadness. It was thought to haunt the lonely and defenseless, becoming stronger with each ounce of fear it instilled. Sarah hurried upstairs, desperate to find sanctuary in her bedroom. She slammed the door shut and locked it, her hands shaking violently. However, the silence was awful. It was as if the home itself was alive and breathing, waiting for her to take the next step. A low, guttural mumble filled the room, and it wasn't her own. "You can't escape," it snarled. "I've been watching you for a long time, Sarah." She spun around, trying to find the source of the voice, but there was nothing, just shadows moving across the walls. She backed into a corner when her phone's battery died, leaving her in near darkness. The muttering became louder and closer, and she felt a chilly breath on the back of her neck. In a panic, Sarah remembered something her grandmother had told her. The silent shadow could only be expelled if it was faced without fear and with inner power. It lived on fear, but was weak against bravery. Sarah took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and braced herself. "You're not real," she insisted, her voice wavering but firm. "You have no power over me." The whispering came to an end, and there was a brief period of silence. Then the room's temperature began to rise, and the oppressive cold lifted. Sarah opened her eyes to see the shadow diminishing and fleeing into the corners of the room. With each step she made, the shadow faded, leaving only a faint outline against the wall. Sarah gathered her strength and took one last step, and the shadow vanished into thin air, leaving her alone in the dark, but fearless. The lights flickered back on, and the suffocating silence gave way to the house's regular buzz. Sarah dropped into her bed, fatigued but relieved. She knew the silent shadow would not return, at least not to her. She overcame her fear. But as she fell asleep, a nagging idea crossed her mind. The silent shadow thrived on dread, and there were plenty of others in Ravenswood who were just as terrified as she was. Mark had been delivering pizza for more than 5 years. He knew every street and alley in the small town, but the night shift always made him nervous. It was just after midnight when the order arrived. The address was unusual. It was located on the outskirts of town, deep in the woods. Mark hesitated but drove away nevertheless, assuming it was simply another usual delivery. As he drove along the dark, winding lanes, the woods appeared to close in on him. The GPS signal failed, forcing him to rely on his intuition. The road narrowed to a dirt trail. Finally, he arrived at a rundown house that was scarcely visible in the moonlight. He knocked on the door, but nobody responded. The home was strangely silent, and Mark felt an overwhelming sensation of dread. As he turned to leave, the door creaked open by itself. Against his better judgment, he walked inside and called out for the customer. The house appeared to have been abandoned for many years. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, and the air was heavy with the odor of decay. Mark had placed the pizza on a filthy table and was about to leave when he heard a faint murmur. "Thank you." He spun around, but no one was present. The whisper became stronger and more insistent. "Stay with us." Mark sprinted for the door, but it slammed shut before he could get to it. The whispers grew into screams, filling the house with deafening sounds. The walls seemed to close in, and Mark felt hands grab him and drag him back. The following morning, Mark's car was discovered abandoned outside the old house, but he was never seen again. Some claim that if you listen closely, you can still hear his screams ringing over the woods at night. Sarah enjoyed playing the piano. She had inherited her grandmother's old upright piano, which she would play every evening to relax. But once her grandma died, the piano took on an unsettling aura. It was minor at first, just the sense of being watched while she played. However, the situation quickly escalated. One night, Sarah awoke to the sound of the piano playing by itself. The tune was haunting. She had never heard this song before. She crept downstairs, her heart beating against her chest. The piano keys shifted as if an invisible hand was playing them. She stared in terror as the song became louder and more wild. Suddenly, the piano stopped and the room fell silent. Sarah felt a cool breath against the back of her neck and heard a murmur in her ear. "Join me." She went back to her room, terrified, and locked the door behind her. But the music resumed, this time accompanied by a faint voice singing along. The following day, Sarah discovered a sheet of music on the piano bench that she had never seen before. The title said, "The Final Requiem." As she stared at it, the notes became blurry, and she felt dizzy. The last thing she remembers is the sense of falling. Sarah's friends arrived the next day to check on her and discovered her slumped over the piano, lifeless. The sheet music was gone, and the piano lid was shut. However, the eerie song lingered in their brains for days later, as if the piano had engraved it on their souls. Jenna was always captivated by old, beautiful mirrors. She acquired them from antique stores, estate sales, and auctions. Her most recent acquisition was a gorgeous gilded mirror from the 1800s, which she hung in her bedroom. Jenna noticed something weird the first night she used the mirror. Her reflection appeared to lag after her motions, almost like it was examining her. She went to bed, dismissing it as a light-related illusion. However, the following nights became increasingly distressing. The reflection began to move on its own, smiling when she didn't, and twisting its head when she remained still. One night, while she was getting ready for bed, she noticed her mirror wave at her, despite the fact that her hands were by her sides. She tried to sleep after covering the mirror with a sheet, terrified. The sheet was on the floor the next morning, and the mirror was no longer covered. Jenna resolved to get rid of it, but when she attempted to remove it from the wall, it refused to move. It seemed as if the mirror had merged with the wall, forming a permanent fixture. That night, Jenna awoke to find herself standing in front of the mirror, her palms pressed against the glass, but she didn't move them. Her reflection was drawing her in. She tried to scream, but nothing came out as the glass transformed into liquid and swallowed her whole. The next day, her friends discovered her room empty, with the mirror damaged and shattered on the floor. Jenna's scared visage was locked in each shard, permanently imprisoned between the fragmented parts. These stories demonstrate how the ordinary can become remarkable in the most horrifying ways. The next time you hear a whisper, see a flicker in a mirror, or sense something just beyond the shadows, Remember that there are things in this world that transcend explanation, and they may be closer than you realize.